Coming up on Philosophy Talk.
Can speech kill?
Words can demean, defame, and debase, but can they cause death?
Words don't kill. People do.
Unlike sticks and stones, names can't even hurt. So how could they possibly kill?
People talking, trying to pick us up. Why won't they let us be? Bricks and stones may break my bones, but talk don't bother me.
Can speech create a climate in which violence is condoned and encouraged?
Never underestimate the toxic power of hate speech.
Should speech that is so poisonous be banned?
People talking, trying to pick us, yep, and they scandalizing my name. They'll say anything just to make me feel bad, yes, anything to make me shame.
When are words a license to kill?
Our guest is Lynne Tirrell, author of Genocidal Language Games.
Can speech kill? Coming up on Philosophy Talk. Can mere words be used to kill?
Words can hurt and offend, but can they be lethal weapons?
How do we fight back when words are weaponized?
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor.
And I'm Josh Landy. We're here at the studios of KALW San Francisco.
Continuing conversations that begin at Philosophers Corner on the Stanford campus, where I teach philosophy and Josh directs our philosophy and literature initiative.
Today we're asking, can words kill?
Oh, Josh, of course not. Words don't kill. People do. And you know what? People don't even kill with words. They kill with things like bombs and guns, Josh.
I'm not so sure, Ken. I think maybe sometimes words can be just as deadly as a gun or a bomb.
Oh, come on. Look, I'm going to grant you, words can certainly hurt or offend, but they can't literally kill.
Well, think about the words that the Nazis used about Jews, or the words that the Hutu used about the Tutsi. What about those?
Well, look, I'm not denying that words can sometimes incite violence.
Well, no, I'm not just talking about incitation. I'm saying that words can be instruments of violence. I mean, maybe not in every case, but when it comes to genocidal killers and their henchmen, words can be every bit as deadly as a machete.
Oh, Josh, wait a minute. Words don't have the power to suffocate or to cut a throat.
Well, words aren't killing through physical force. They're killing through representational force.
What? Representational force?
Well, think about the way that the Nazi genocide unfolded, right? I mean, it started with a kind of latent anti-Semitism that was just widespread throughout the German people at the time. But then propaganda came into the picture, and propaganda transformed Jews into mere second-class citizens into a kind of category of subhuman animal.
Yeah, okay, that was bad, but the actual genocide, Josh, it took more than the words. I mean, if the Nazis had stopped at the propaganda, well, then they wouldn't have been genocidal killers.
Look, 1930s Germany was a loaded gun, right? I mean, using those words was pulling the trigger of a loaded gun. So in that context, using propaganda, that was committing genocide.
Josh, I see your point. I see your metaphor of the loaded gun, but I still say that representations, words, propaganda can't be acts of genocide all on their own until somebody moves beyond representations and actually acts in the world. Until they wield that machete or turn that knob, they haven't yet committed genocide.
Well, not everyone agrees with you, Ken. I mean, think about those Hutu journalists in Rwanda who engaged in hate radio. They were found guilty of actual genocide. They weren't condemned for incitement or something like that. Or like aiding and abetting the people who were actually doing the killing. They were convicted of genocide. Why do you think that was?
Well, I think that's because the International Tribunal for Rwanda, I'm afraid to say, was conceptually confused.
No. That tribunal recognized something really important. You don't have to wield a machete to be a killer. In the right context, it's enough to represent somebody else as a subhuman cockroach. In one case, yeah, you're committing physical violence. But in the other case, you are committing representational violence.
Josh, look, I know you're a literary guy, and I know you like metaphor. And I think what you're calling representational violence, that's a thing, but it's not genuine violence. It's just metaphorical violence.
Well, tell that to the victims of dehumanizing language.
Well, look, I don't by any means to downplay how dangerous this kind of language can be. Yeah, it hurts and offends. Yeah, it poisons the politics of a community. Yeah, and sometimes it even gives people license, at least in their own mind, to do all manner of horrible things to one another.
So it sounds like you're agreeing with me.
No, look, I will concede that, what did you call it, representational violence. I will concede that's a real thing. But that just doesn't mean that language itself can literally kill.
Well, maybe a little Wittgenstein can help.
So, Wittgenstein, yeah.
Well, well, bear with me. So what Wittgenstein saw is that the distinction between speech and actions, that's not as strong as we like to think, right? The meaning of a word is necessarily connected to the way we act. So it's just a mistake to think that there are words and then there are actions.
Okay, that's interesting. I like Wittgenstein, but what's that got to do with genocide?
Well, think of a genocidal act as the final move in what Wittgenstein would call a language game. The game starts with dehumanizing representations. These representations shape perception and thought, and then thought culminates in murder.
I still think you and Wittgenstein are making the same mistake. You're collapsing thought and action into a single thing. They're not a single thing. That's why you like him, because he makes the same mistake as you.
Thanks, Ken. Well, obviously, I'm not going to convince you, but maybe this will. We sent our roving philosophical reporter, Liza Veal, to catalog language put to violent, hateful, and deadly use.
Warning, this piece contains audio that some listeners may find disturbing. Liza files this report.
A lot of times the impact of hateful words is diffuse and inchoate, but sometimes the consequences are explicit, easy to trace. In the lead up to the Rwandan genocide and throughout the 100 days of murder, the attacks on the Tutsis were coordinated over state-supported radio.
Notice to all cockroaches listening now, Rwanda belongs to those who defend it. And you cockroaches are not Rwandans. Everybody is up in arms to defeat cockroaches. So you see, you cockroaches have no way out. If we exterminate all the cockroaches, no one will judge us, because we will be winners.
In Myanmar, years of threats of violence on social media are now being carried out in what the United Nations is describing as a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. It's time to kill all Kalars, says one typical Facebook post from 2013, using a derogatory word for people of South Indian origins living in Myanmar. For the next generation, it says, burn all Muslim villages nearby. Today, there's evidence of massacres in which government soldiers slaughtered civilians by the hundreds and wrought every conceivable form of violence and cruelty. Hateful calls to action are all over social media, all over the world, and it's not just online. In Poland, this year's annual Independence Day demonstration, organized by far-right nationalist groups, drew estimated crowds of 60,000 people, marching under the slogan, Poland for the Poles. Death to the enemies of the homeland, read signs. With the dehumanizing language and the imagery of cloaks and red smoke flares and masses in the streets, you could argue there's a threat being made. And if a threat or a show of power is effective, the consequence is that the targeted side feels powerless. Here in this country, when the founder of the American Nazi Party, George Lincoln Rockwell, threatened the freedom riders of the civil rights movement, his supporters made it happen.
What we are out to exterminate is traitors to this country, and we are going to exterminate them. The white race isn't going to tolerate any more treason and race mixing in this country.
He followed the freedom riders in a bus called Rockwell's Hate Bus. Civil rights activists were mobbed, beaten, and harassed.
I can say, give me back our white Christian America or give me death. I don't care what they do, we're going to give it back.
Today, white supremacists draw power from remembering past racial subjugation.
The structure of America is sadly not based on racism.
Christopher Cantwell, one of the organizers of the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, uses his podcast to foment racism.
What we have is this ridiculous, hyper-inclusive egalitarian narrative, cultural communism, that says, oh, well, if black people are getting arrested more than whites, then the security guard must be racist.
Charlottesville is, of course, where the counter-protester Heather Heyer died when a white nationalist drove a car into the crowd.
I hope with every ounce of my soul that every white person in America is like, get the out of here, you animal. That's what I really want. That's what I'm going to do about systematic racism, is to promote it and glorify it and make it look cool until it's like the new trend amongst the young people, and being an anti-racist is looked at as being gay.
It's easy to see the impact of these words on Heather Heyer, but what about everybody else? Most of the world will never hear the sound of Christopher Cantwell's voice. Do his words still touch them? For Philosophy Talk, I'm Liza Veal.
Thanks for that powerful, disturbing, but important piece, Liza. I'm Ken Taylor. With me is my Stanford colleague, Josh Landy, and today we're questioning whether speech can kill.
We're joined now by Lynne Tirrell, who is professor of philosophy at the University of Connecticut and the author of Genocidal Language Games, as well as a forthcoming book about toxic speech. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Lynne.
Thank you, Josh and Ken. Thank you so much for having me on the air today.
So, Len, you're a philosopher of language, like me, and like me, you did your PhD during, I think, roughly the same period. I'm a little bit older than you, and in our day, in graduate school, people weren't thinking about these issues, and we weren't trained to think about them in graduate school. So I'd love to know how you got interested in this topic.
I think it was because I wrote my dissertation on metaphor, and so I was really keenly interested in I ultimately argued that metaphor doesn't live in the words, it lives in our interpretation of the words. And that got me thinking about the power of language to shape our patterns of interpretation. And so pretty soon after I finished, I started looking at what I call derogatory terms. That has been taken up as slurs starting in the 2000s. But back when I was working on it in the early days, I was really focused on a particular kind of slur that derogates individuals on the basis of race and gender.
So that gets us into our topic. I'm wondering, classic liberals like Mill don't even think that speech can harm, let alone kill. But your view, if I understand correctly, is that this derogatory speech that you're talking about, this toxic speech, can actually kill. So what does Mill have wrong about this?
I think that Mill was thinking about it a little bit too much in the abstract, a little bit too much in terms of the rights of the people. When you read on liberty, it's a very colonialist kind of picture of liberty. I won't go into the details of it, but I urge people who are reading it to look for that. Even though I do love Mill, I disagree with a lot of what he has to say about the power of speech.
Yeah, but Lynn, so Mill thinks, Mill's a complicated guy. I don't want to do Mill scholarship, but he doesn't like speech that incites violence. If you stand in front of the house of the corn grower, he says, and incite the people to tear up their corn, that's bad. But if you have the opinion that the corn growers are exploiters of the people, that's okay. Any opinion okay, and expressing any opinion is okay. And that's kind of what the speech, freedom of speech purists believe, that kind of stuff. Obviously, you don't believe that. I don't want to get into that, but I'm just thinking, just give me a thought, a convincing encapsulation of the idea that speech, mere words, mere speaking, can be a harm, contrary to what Mill thinks.
So if I say, and now I'm not endorsing this, but if I say Muslims are terrorists, some people might cash that out as if it's political speech. But I see that as something that you can analyze in classic philosophy of language, but that you actually need to look at the way in which that's embedded in systems of power and how it is getting us to reframe our understanding of an entire religion. And so by sinking Muslim to terrorist in the minds of people, we are, to go with what you were saying, we are damaging them, we are demeaning, defaming, and so on. But I also think that we are making their mode of life unlivable in certain ways.
So you think,
and so in that sense, it kills.
So you think, let me just put this really briefly before we break. You think that we change with our speech, Muslims are terrorists. We actually have changed the world. We have reconfigured the world somehow in a way that damages Muslims. Is that a fair
Yes.
encapsulation? Okay, so
Yes.
that's what we'll have to dig into, how language can reconfigure the world just in the speaking. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Today, we're thinking about speech that kills with Lynne Tirrell from the University of Connecticut.
In our next segment, we'll explore how mere words can harm and perhaps even kill. Can words make up in representational power what they lack in physical power? Does the damage that words can do depend on people willing to translate them into action?
From words to thought to action. Plus, your calls and emails when Philosophy Talk continues.
Someday I'll be big enough so you can't hit me, and all you're ever gonna be is mean. Why you gotta be so mean?
Words like knives, swords, and weapons, not just mean, but harmful, even lethal. I'm Ken Taylor. This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Accept your intelligence. I'm Josh Landy, and we're asking how speech can kill. Our guest is Lynne Tirrell from the University of Connecticut.
Okay, Lynn, so I'm going to grant you, I'm not going to try and defend Mill here at all. I'm going to grant you that words can cause harm and maybe even kill. But I think we started touching on this, but I think I need help with understanding how they manage to do that. They surely don't do that the way that guns and knives do. So how is it that words can harm and even possibly kill? Let's talk about that a little bit. What's the first thing that I need to understand this possibility?
I think that the most helpful thing to start with is understanding that speech is part of practices, that it's not just a one-off, one person saying something on one occasion, but that that might be how things start, but that they get repeated and repeated and repeated. We get used to it. So in the early days of feminism, the second wave of feminism, philosophers and legal advocates made a distinction between or started to try to argue against pornography, saying pornography causes harm to women. In fact, they argued that pornography causes rape. And it was really hard to make that causal argument. There's a parallel in the arguments that came up between the prosecution and defense in the International Criminal Tribunal of Rwanda, because in order to show incitement, they were supposed to show a direct link between the speech and the action outcome. That's really hard to do. So if we take a lesson from the feminist strategy, they moved from causal harms, which are, we can believe they happen, but harder to prove, to constitutive harms, and saying that speech can be a harm because it creates a toxic climate, and it does all the kinds of damage you outlined at the beginning of the show, damaging a person's social standing, their functioning, humiliating them, demeaning them, and so on, inflicting a variety of indignities that makes it very hard for them to actually have decent functioning in the society.
So it sounds like you're saying that if there's enough of the wrong kind of speech, then you get a new normal, right? The communal understanding of what's normal changes, and then this affects the way people think about themselves and also the way people think about each other.
And the way that people think they can treat each other,
right.
Because our conception of what kind of being you are shapes how people treat each other.
Yeah, okay. So the Nazis, or the Hutu, they thought of their victims as some human vermin of some sort, and they thought that empowered them or licensed them or permitted them to treat them in these ways. But that didn't make them that. I mean, the Nazis thinking that the Jews were subhuman vermin did not make the Jews to be subhuman vermin. I mean, it's not the case that everybody who thinks of me as X, right, whatever X is, makes me to be an X, right?
No, but they can make you incapable of functioning the way that you seek to function as an adult, autonomous human being in a free society. So, for example, think about gay rights.
So slow down. Does speech do that, or does power, political, economic power do that? The speech married with the power to carry out what you declare to be the case. Yeah, that's right. Who would deny that? But does the speech itself? Or am I making a bad distinction?
You can't tell because I'm on the radio. We're on the radio, but I'm nodding over here.
Okay.
So for me, the speech is never just speech. It's never, to use Catherine McKinnon's phrase, only words. The speech is embedded in social and political, with social and political force. So, that's why, if I just make up some name and call you it, there's no power to that. But if I use a derogatory term that has a history in our culture of putting a group of people down, then I have done something that is capable of inflicting harm. So it has to be embedded in social practices, and those social practices include all the economic practices, discrimination, and other things.
How much do I, as the victim of your speech, have to grant authority to your practices? So you, the Nazi, say to me, the Jew, I'm a subhuman vermin. I say, no, the heck I'm not, and I'm going to resist you with everything in my power. How much does my resistance to you have to be cut off in order for your speech, backed by your power, to constitute me in the world, to constitutively, as opposed to just making me and you at odds? But it's not just that you and I are at odds. It's that it sounds like you think you make me into something. You construe my agency or something.
Well, it depends how much power you actually have. But I love that question because a friend of mine who is much, much older, she's somewhere in her late 80s now, so my mother's generation, she told me a story about the headmaster at her girls' school telling her that she should not go to college to become a kindergarten teacher because women are just taking the place of men in colleges, and that was a really bad thing. And she walked out of the headmaster's office thinking, wow, he's really an idiot. But how many girls in that school didn't go to college because they felt like it wasn't their place? So the question of what builds resistance is part of where we can go later when we talk about inoculations and antidotes and things. And some people are pretty good at resisting. But you saying, if you're the hypothetical Jew in Nazi Germany and you say, I don't accept all this demeaning behavior, you can do what my colleague Jeremy Wanderer at UMass Boston calls ignoring or rejecting. If you completely ignore it, you're in trouble because you're at peril. If you reject it, that's a position of strength, and that's pretty cool. But you may not have the power to avoid all of the rest of the baggage that comes with the imposition of that label on you, because other people will accept it and they will start treating you in ways that deny you access to education, deny you access to work opportunities, social opportunities, and more.
Right. I mean, so it sounds like it's actually quite a complicated picture because it's, clearly language is doing some really important work here, but it's not only language. There's power structures, there's systems, institutional systems, practices. And it seems like we need to be making a distinction here between the effect of this hateful language on the targeted group and the effect of this language on the powerful group, right? Because it sounds like you're saying, look, the effect on the Jews in the 1930s, it's not just that Jews might start thinking of themselves in a certain way. It's also that the non-Jewish Germans are thinking about the Jews in a certain kind of way. So is that an important distinction for you?
It is, but it's also that's part of the insider-outsider way that some of these terms operate. And so the Germans who thought of themselves as true Germans and Aryans may have felt licensed to treat Jews in a particular way. They also felt they also gained a kind of sense of solidarity with others who they saw as like them. And so there was a kind of polarization. So first it's division, and then division becomes entrenched and widened into a kind of polarization. And I think you have to look at what the dominators would view as a positive effect for them. They really enjoy their camaraderie and their group identity that they're building at the expense of the subordinated group.
Yeah, there's definitely, language plays all kinds of complicated roles in our collective lives. I mean, Jeff Nunberg, the linguist and philosopher Jeff Nunberg, there's this beautiful article on slurs where he says slurs have an affiliational purpose. I call that group the N-word or whatever, and I thereby affiliate myself with a certain group of people, and that's a powerful thing. These human affiliations, we array ourselves into tribes through affiliational language. I don't deny that. So, and I think Josh is right. So the dynamics of language and use interacts with power. It interacts with social structures and all that sort of stuff. But I don't know that the encapsulated phrase "language can kill." It doesn't I mean, that on its own, I understand why people react negatively to that, because that seems too simple. What you're talking about is really a complicated structure in which language plays one role, but it's not the only thing at work. But I don't think you would deny that, or would you?
No, but it's part of why in my work, I started thinking about the power of derogatory terms and using U.S. context. And then I got interested in what was going on in Rwanda in the 90s, and actually have been there a few times and done research with people there. And the reason that I think saying, if you just say like a word can kill or language can kill, you obliterate the important complexity. So I agree with that. Okay. But I think you shouldn't think it kills. Most of the time, it doesn't kill like a bullet.
Right.
What I'm moving toward now is looking at the idea of toxicity and the way that words can be like poison, which is a metaphor that comes from Victor Klemperer, who wrote the groundbreaking book, The Language of the Third Reich, where he chronicled his experience as a Jew during the Holocaust period.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're asking whether words can kill, and if so, how. We'd love to have you join this conversation. And Ellie in San Francisco is on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Ellie. What's your comment or question?
Hi. I agree with what you were just talking about how words probably. So the sentence, "Can speech kill?" I mean, a word isn't like a bullet, right? A word is not going to literally murder someone, directly. But there are cases where, and I would just, give you this as a question, of course. There's cases when words cause death, right? They seem to be the causal factor in someone dying. There was recently this documentary called Mentor about children getting bullied in high school. And there's a case in that documentary about a little boy who was getting bullied, and then he gets this email saying, "Why don't you go kill yourself?" And he went home and killed himself that day.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
So, and so I guess my question would be, doesn't it seem in that case that words did kill?
Thanks for.
I mean, it's causal. The words weren't the noose or the gun that he used to kill himself, but it seemed like it's a direct correlation.
Thanks for the question, Ellie. What do you think of that, Lynn?
I think it's incredibly sad. I think that slurs and derogatory terms can function like bully words to begin with. And then when you have some kind of bullying that actually includes a directive to do harm to yourself, then you're getting into a different kind of criminal speech. Right. It's interesting because the way Ellie phrased it, that the bully said, "Why don't you go home and do this?" It's like they are putting the onus back onto the person who has been so brutalized by the onslaught of terrible speech.
So it seems like there are these cases. I mean, another thing that comes to mind for me is PTSD. I mean, there are a bunch of studies that have been coming out about the physical effects of bullying and other kinds of, exposure to toxic speech. I mean, is that something you have in mind too? Because obviously, the case of Rwanda is maybe a more complex and diffuse, but also more deadly or more systematically deadly case. But there are these lower level, but maybe more common cases, right, of actual physical damage being done.
I think that is a great point, and it is part of why I'm turning to toxicity now, because I think, a child growing up in a context where the parents, are constantly using negative words, maybe they're connected with, but we'll make them not connected with brutal violence. But things like, "Oh, you're so stupid. What a moron you are." I had a neighbor once who I heard through the window calling his little kids holes. I think I can say that on the air because it's not a whole slur.
Sure.
And I thought, what does the kid think? What are they growing up believing about themselves, and what kind of effect do they have when they walk into the room with that person who they have to be with all the time? And the answer is there are clear physiological effects to that kind of behavior. And in Rwanda, the aftermath of the propaganda, and it isn't just propaganda, it was changing practices of how Tutsi were referred to and then how they were treated, has left many people in that country with mental health issues that there are agencies there that are working on.
Harvey in San Francisco's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Harvey. Give us your question. We might answer it after the break. No? Okay, give us your question.
Yes, getting back to the Nazis. Well, first of all, to state the obvious, when you say speech doesn't kill, a direct order to kill is essentially just like pulling the trigger. Some of the Nazis try to defend themselves. They say we were just following orders, but the ones who gave the orders didn't even try to say we only gave the orders and the other ones carried them out. But getting back to more general speech, there was this guy named Julius Streicher. He published. He was the editor and publisher of a publication called Der Stürmer, The Stormer, which was virulently anti-Semitic. It was, a little bit embarrassing to the other Nazis who were in charge. He was so violently anti-Jewish. Like he published a children's story. He published a children's story called The Poisonous Mushroom. And he said, just like one poisonous mushroom can kill an entire family, one Jew can poison an entire village or an entire Volk, the German term VOLK. And then after the war, he was tried at Nuremberg. He was found guilty of, I forgot the exact charge, but like genocide or crimes against humanity. And he was actually hanged by the Allies because he actually created the environment in which Jews could be more easily killed. So maybe if you know anything about him, you could talk about that.
Can you answer briefly, Lynn? Thanks for the call, Harvey. Can you answer briefly, Lynn?
Yeah, I think that the case of Streicher was actually very influential in the way that the International Criminal Tribunal dealt with what's now known as the media trial. And that was a trial of the key radio and print leaders of the Hutu extremist movement. So they were found guilty of genocide. And many legal scholars are now wrangling over, how careful was that case, how well done it was, and so on. But I think that the case of Streicher was crucial for that analysis.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're thinking about how speech can potentially kill with Lynne Tirrell from the University of Connecticut, author of Genocidal Language Games.
If some forms of speech are so toxic that they can kill or at least harm, should they be regulated or even banned? Or should all forms of speech be allowed?
Regulating toxic speech, when Philosophy Talk continues. Can you imagine someone calling you a name so toxic that they shouldn't have the right to even say it? I'm Ken Taylor, and this is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Josh Landy. Our guest is Lynne Tirrell from the University of Connecticut, and we're asking whether speech can kill.
So, Lynn, I'm just going to assume, I think it's a safe assumption, that you're not a free speech purist. And so I want to know how you would go about regulating, controlling, not necessarily under our laws, but imagine an ideal society. I'm going to appoint you czar of the world, and you're going to regulate so-called what you call toxic speech. What would you do? What's the first thing you would do?
I would start with an assumption that we want our society to be one in which people have the ability, at least adults, have the ability to make decisions that promote their own best interests. And that we actually want that to not only be adults, we want it to be something that we are growing in children as they emerge into adulthood. And so certain kinds of propaganda interfere with our ability to make decisions that promote our own best interests or even identify our own best interests. So I think things that interfere with that might be things that we as a society would want to say no to. But then how do you say no? And that's where we should discuss the tricky business of, do we want explicit laws? Do we want penalties that are not part of law exactly? I mean, they're law, but things like Title IX, which say, okay, you can be really discriminatory, but then you don't get any federal money.
How about these are excellent suggestions for regulation. What about a kind of positive response? How about counter speech? Could we be encouraging people to use positive language,
right?
Whatever the opposite of a toxin is.
Especially because the millions would say to you, the way to combat speech is with more speech. That's their claim always. More speech. Speech is in this arena, and it should always be combated with speech. So what do you think of that?
So I love the idea of positive more speech. I think of that as, if we could find antidotes,
right.
That would be terrific. The problem is antidotes are after the harm. So I'm actually looking at some work done in the social sciences in the 1960s by a Yale social psychologist named Bill McGuire on inoculation theory.
Great.
And it's both really exciting and a little bit scary because it involves a certain level of social manipulation, right? But I think more speech is definitely part of the picture, but we have to recognize that a lot of times the bad speech is targeted at the most vulnerable members of our society. And so expecting them to counter bad speech with more speech when they're already vulnerable and now being harmed, I think the rest of us have an obligation, those of us who are not being targeted.
That's
whoever
right.
that is.
I think you have a point, but I think it points in a different direction. There's another equality concern that one could have in a liberal, democratic, pluralistic society. Equal access to the means of both self and public representation. And so that equal access to the means of representation gives you a chance to enter the contest of representations. I agree with you that the contest of representations is a vital thing in a pluralistic society. So it's not like we say, well, they're the powerful, and we make it our agenda to provide equal access to the means of representation. What do you think about that? We don't usually think of that as an equality concern, but it seems
I think it's great. And one of the to go back to the inoculations idea and this equal access to the means of representation, one of the ways I would come back against the kind of stance I usually take is, well, do you think that the neo-Nazi white supremacists should have equal airtime or equal access to the means of representation? And that's where the inoculation theory kind of says, well, no, maybe not. Maybe we should let there be some of that, but not too much of that. And then how do you deal with that question and that approach? I honestly, I don't have an answer, but maybe one of you do.
Let's try one of our callers. Eileen from Mountain View's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Eileen. What's your comment or question?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. My question concerns the self-image of the people who are committing the atrocities, and I'm wondering if it's not only that people think badly of the people they're killing, of course, but also that they think that they're doing things in their own best interest. They think well of themselves. They're taught to think that we need to eliminate this segment of the population for the good of our country. And there's a really interesting article in the Science News of August 19, 2017 that talks about Rwanda. It's called Duty-Bound Killings. And they talked about a lot of the killing was done by like militia groups, and so that makes me worry about local militias here. But mostly, I'm wondering about the power of words to make you feel better. Thank you. I'll take my answer off the air.
Thanks for the question, Eileen. What you got a thought there, Lynn?
Yeah, I think that goes back to a point we were talking about earlier about the effect of the speech on the people that are not directly harmed. And I actually think there's a kind of boomerang effect that the speech has. So on the one hand, the perpetrators in Rwanda felt really good about what they were doing for a while. They didn't at first. It was hard. If you read their testimonies, quite a few of them had a hard time, picking up the machete and killing their neighbor. Once they were beyond neighbors and they were in the habit of it, it was just work, and that's what they called it, just work and getting the job done. But for some of them, the idea that they were clearing the land of an evil infestation and that kind of thing, that wasn't really the main thing that was motivating them. It was really this group identity. And so when you think about the self-image of those who are committing the atrocity, often they have very low self-images, and participating with this group, this gang, and they actually called them gangs, helped them to feel involved. It helped them to feel valued, and they had a shared project.
Yes, Simone de Beauvoir has interesting things to say about those kind of people and how they become the henchmen of the genocidal killers. But that's a deeper
show.
That's another show. But we got a caller, Max in San Francisco. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Max. What's your comment or question?
Hi, thank you. My question is this: if we see someone, let's see, I'm sorry, a parent abusing a child verbally in public, how is that different from seeing a parent beating a child in public? It feels wrong to just kind of look away.
Yeah.
Not do anything, and what are one's responsibilities?
Take it, Max. I like your question. Thanks a lot. I want to expand Max's question beyond just the child, because we may feel some paternalistic concern for the well-being of the child. Just take two equals and the person hurling hate speech in public at another person. What is it we're not part of the transaction in general? I mean, are we supposed to? Is it okay to just be bystanders to this, or are we complicit if we're just bystanders? Kind of linguistic bystanders.
Right, and should we intervene? And how?
I think the question of the obligation to intervene is a really tricky ethical one. I sort of stand on the sort of more extreme side of, yes, you have a moral obligation to speak up, unless doing so actually puts you at serious risk of harm or injury. And I think that's something that each individual has to figure out in their own case. But so many of the cases in everyday life are, men telling sexist jokes about women, and one guy is a little bit uncomfortable but doesn't say, I don't like it when you talk that way.
So I'm going to give you something I worry about. So I worry about how we resist, just by what linguistic devices we resist problematic speech. Somebody says, that darned, they say something worse than that, but I can't say worse than that darn Tirrell was just on philosophy talk. And I say to Josh, Tirrell was on philosophy talk. I don't say that darn, because then I would be complicit. But what if I just drop the derogatory terms, drop the slurs, and report what you said? Is that enough, or do I have to do more? Do I have to call that person on their use?
I think you have to at least drop it, but I think it's better if you call them on it.
But how do I do that?
And that's because I think that when we speak, we make certain kinds, we make commitments, and one of them is a kind of meta level commitment. It's like you rise above and you're actually making a commitment to how we can talk. So if I start using racist or sexist derogatory terms, then I am making a commitment to their viability and their value, and that's a problem. So saying, I don't like it when you talk that way, I think that's not a good way to talk. So you make it explicit and bring it out in the open, then that's something that you can then have an argument about.
We just received a comment from Joanne in Studio A saying that hate speech causes harm, but it's protected under the First Amendment. So she said, Joanne says this discussion is moot since the language is protected.
Yeah, it's moot maybe in the world, but we're talking about ideals, aren't we, Lynn? Give me your last.
We are.
Give me your last comment about how we should regard this. I mean, divorce from the law and how we might want to design an ideal speech community.
So what I'm concerned about are the licenses to speak that we give and take in our everyday talk with each other, socially and also in private, in the sense of very small, like just you and I. And I think that if we engage with a sort of attention to the power of what we say and the damage it can do or the repair it can offer, then our society is going to be much healthier and our individuals and groups are going to be much happier.
So, Lynne, on that uplifting, optimistic note, I'm going to thank you for joining us. This has been a great conversation, and I don't think we killed anybody with our words.
I don't think so. Thanks so much for having me on the air.
Our guest has been Lynne Tirrell. She's a professor of philosophy at the University of Connecticut, author of Genocidal Language Game, and also a forthcoming book on toxic speech. You got one very quick thought, Josh?
Look, I think toxic speech is really damaging, but the good news from this show is that we got an array of strategy at our disposals, not just regulation, counter speech, inoculation, intervention, social practices. We need to get on that.
Yeah, this is big stuff. This conversation continues at Philosophers Corner at our online community of thinkers, where our motto is cogito ergo blogo, I think, therefore I blog. And if you have a question that wasn't addressed in today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send your questions to us at comments@philosophytalk.org. And if it's a scintillating, deep, and important question, we will feature it on the blog.
You can also become a partner in the community by visiting our website, philosophytalk.org. Now let's hear from someone whose rapid words never do harm. It's Ian Scholes, the 60-second philosopher.
Ian Scholes. I look around me and hear eroding norms and normalizing and punch-drunk persuasion and ham-fisted propaganda. Not much hate speech, per se, but that gets shut down for protesters before it hits the bullhorn. There's plenty of scorn online, the right calling the left snowflakes and cucks and social justice warriors and calling themselves alt-right because calling yourself a fascist hasn't been hip since 1937. The left calls the right Nazis, and the right calls the street-fighting left Antifa, short for anti-fascist. So there's an implicit acceptance of that description by the right, I guess. Sticks and stones might break your bones, but names will never hurt you. But names can incite others to hurt you. Luckily, most lefties get triggered by insults, not angered. They lie down on the fainting couch and issue wounded little Facebook posts. Actual American speech is not inherently dangerous so much as it's degraded and ignored. Conservatives made a fuss about being censored at UC Berkeley, but were they? Last fall, they popped up in Berkeley once a month or so, even though nobody wanted to listen to them. Even the people who brought them there didn't want to listen to them. They just wanted a trouble magnet, kind of like yippies back in the 60s. The school spent $500,000 in security to protect them. Maybe that's the point. Bankrupt the school so Nazis can make speeches nobody listens to nobody. Win-win-win. Milo Yiannopoulos, the alt-right pretty boy, did bail on speaking at Berkeley. His followers claimed the left was shaming the memory of Mario Savio and the free speech movement. The alt-right, in solidarity with Mario Savio. Next thing you know, they'll be high-fiving Jane Fonda and putting up posters of Ho Chi Minh in their bunkers. Everybody's freaking out about free speech and fake news and authenticity and leaks and privacy and assaults in the press, but no official has stopped anybody from speech. The problem is getting people to shut up. If we could remove anything from the marketplace of ideas, is that still around, by the way? I would pick Twitter. If you have a taco truck, Twitter is good for letting customers downtown know when you'll be at their building. I don't see what else it's good for. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. People say alarming things. People get alarmed right back. Before you know it, there's an endless feedback loop of responses of what remains of the mainstream media wondering what it all means and writing articles that are mainly transcriptions of Twitter feeds. I don't even subscribe to Twitter, and yet I've seen nearly all of President Trump's tweets, which are reposted and reprinted everywhere. But despite all the alarm, Twitter is nothing. It's a telegram, which the world can read, or a postcard, a billboard, a headline from a dead newspaper. Just because the president tweeted doesn't mean it has value. A tweet is not a press release or a proclamation or a manifesto. It's not a letter, pamphlet, or brochure. It's not a law or a poster. It's not a shout in a crowded theater. It's not a warning shot across a bow. It's not an announcement over a bullhorn. It's not the lunch menu read over the school's PA, though it could be. Not race results, not arrival times, not a play-by-play, not a call to arms, not a prayer for the dead. It's just a wisecrack thrown out there. Sometimes funny, sometimes not, sometimes just leads to trouble. As President Trump handles it, it's usually 3 a.m, and the president tweets, "I'm the best, you guys, yay." Those who disagree tweet something like, "You're not either the best, shut up." And it goes round and round and round. It would be so much better if we just shut Twitter down, except for taco trucks, and go back to not believing everything we read. But, believing something, that these truths are self-evident maybe, or that these are the times that try men's souls. Yeah, women too. I gotta go.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of KALW, local public radio San Francisco, and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University, copyright 2017.
Our executive producers are David Demarest and Matt Martin.
Our senior producer is Devin Strolovich. Laura McGuire is our director of research. Cindy Prince-Baum is our Director of Marketing.
Thanks also to Merle Kessler, Angela Johnston, and Colin Peden.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from various groups at Stanford University and from the partners at our online community of thinkers.
The views expressed or misexpressed in this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our other funders, not even when they're true and reasonable.
The conversation continues on our website, philosophytalk.org, where you too can become a partner in our community of thinkers. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.
I'm telling you, some of this language makes me want to vomit. Well, maybe not vomit. Makes me want to engage in an involuntary personal protein spill.